There's a moment in your life when you realize you've been running from the wrong thing, a feeling you've labeled as your enemy, a sensation you've tried to numb, avoid, and escape at every turn. And maybe you've built your entire life around not feeling it, around creating walls high enough that it can't reach you. But deep down, beneath all the strategies and distractions, you know the truth. The thing you fear most isn't the danger itself. It's the feeling of fear. And what if I told you that everything you've been taught about fear is backwards? This isn't about pretending fear doesn't exist. This isn't about toxic positivity or forced courage. It's about something quieter, something you feel when you're alone and every defense mechanism fades, leaving only the question you've avoided for years. What if fear isn't the weakness I think it is? What if fear isn't something to overcome, but something to understand? What if the very thing I've been running from is exactly what I need to run toward? And the answer, at least the beginning of it, starts with redefining what fear actually means. Fear does not just signal danger, it signals growth. The sensation you feel when you're afraid, that tightness in your chest, that quickening of your pulse, that voice telling you to turn back. It's not weakness entering your body, it's power preparing to emerge. Fear is your nervous system's way of saying something important is about to happen here. Something that matters, something that could change you. For some people, fear becomes a wall. For others, it becomes a doorway. For many, it becomes an excuse. But for you, maybe it's time fear became something different. A compass, a signal, a teacher showing you exactly where your next level of strength is waiting. And maybe you've asked yourself, why do I feel so paralyzed? Why do I avoid the very things that could transform my life? Why do I stay in situations that drain me? It's not because you're broken by nature. It's because you were taught to treat fear as an enemy instead of an ally. Think about how society teaches us to handle fear. From childhood, you learn that fear is something to hide, that brave people don't feel afraid, that confidence means the absence of doubt, that strength means never trembling. If someone saw your fear, you learn to feel ashamed. If someone noticed your hesitation, you learn to apologize. If someone witnessed your anxiety, you learn to minimize it. If you admitted you were scared, you learn to follow it with, "But it's fine," or "I'm being ridiculous." You learn that fear makes you less than, less capable, less worthy, less strong, less reliable, less valuable, less hireable, less lovable, less respectable. You learn to see fear as a flaw in your character rather than information from your body. But here's what no one told you. Fear and weakness are not the same thing. Fear is not a sign that you can't handle something. Fear is a sign that something matters enough to make you feel. And feelings, even uncomfortable ones, are not your enemy. They're your guidance system. Think about the last time you felt genuine fear, not panic, not anxiety, but real, deep fear about something that could change your life, a conversation you needed to have, a risk you needed to take, a truth you needed to speak, a boundary you needed to set, a dream you needed to pursue, a relationship you needed to leave, a version of yourself you needed to become. Now think about what happened. Did you move toward it or away from it? Did you listen to the fear as information, or did you let it become a prison? Because here's the truth most people never realize. The things you're most afraid of are usually the things you most need to do. Your fear isn't random. It gravitates toward growth. It appears at thresholds, at edges, at moments when you're about to step into a bigger version of yourself. And your mind, trying to protect you, interprets that as danger. But it's not danger. It's transformation trying to happen. And transformation always feels uncomfortable before it feels liberating. You weren't designed to stay the same. You weren't designed to live small. You weren't designed to avoid everything that makes your heart race. You were designed to expand. And expansion requires you to visit the places that scare you. That job you're afraid to apply for. That's not a warning to stay away. That's your potential calling you forward. That conversation you're terrified to have. That's not a signal to stay silent. That's your truth asking to be spoken. That creative project you keep postponing. That's not a sign you're not ready. That's your purpose knocking louder. That relationship pattern you're afraid to break. That's not comfort. That's a cage you've grown used to. That vulnerability you're scared to show. That's not weakness waiting to be exposed. That's authenticity waiting to be expressed. But let me tell you something important. You don't have to let fear control your life. People underestimate how much power fear holds, not because it's stronger than you, but because you were never taught how to work with it. Think about it. You were taught math, history, science, language, but no one taught you how to navigate the sensation of fear in your body. No one taught you that fear is just energy, neutral energy that you can direct. No one taught you that courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is feeling fear and choosing your response anyway. No one taught you that every person you admire has felt the same fear you feel. They just developed a different relationship with it. You may have grown up believing that fearless people don't feel afraid, that confident people never doubt themselves, that successful people never hesitate, that strong people never need reassurance, that brave people never want to run away, that leaders never feel uncertain, that your worth is measured by how little you feel. But look at how much of that has limited you. Look at how many opportunities you've avoided. Look at how small you've made yourself. Look at how much you've held back. Look at how many times you've said, maybe later. Look at how many dreams you've deferred. Look at how many versions of yourself you've abandoned. Look at how exhausting it is to constantly manage your fear instead of learning from it. Look at how much life you've missed while waiting to feel ready. This isn't weakness. This is conditioning. And people rarely talk about it because no one wants to admit that the thing holding them back isn't external circumstances. It's an internal relationship with an emotion they were taught to fear. But healing begins with honesty. And honesty begins here. Fear isn't your problem. Your relationship with fear is. You didn't learn to be afraid alone. You learned that fear means danger. That feeling afraid means something is wrong with you. That hesitation is failure. That doubt is a character flaw. That anxiety is something to fix. That vulnerability is something to hide. That uncertainty means incompetence. They were taught subtly, quietly, consistently, by a world that values appearing strong over being honest. And when people tell you, just do it scared, they don't realize you've been taught that being scared makes you incapable, where admitting fear felt like admitting defeat, where showing uncertainty could cost you respect, where hesitation was seen as weakness, where doubt was treated as lack of commitment. But here's the part. No one told you. You can rewrite your relationship with fear. Just because you learn to see fear as an enemy doesn't mean you have to keep that story. Just because society taught you to hide your fear doesn't mean you can't learn to honor it. Just because you've spent years running from fear doesn't mean you can't turn around and face it now. And this is where your story starts to change, because at some point life gives you two choices. Continue being controlled by fear, or learn to harness it. And the truth is, the moment you even become aware that fear is just a feeling, the moment something inside you says, wait, maybe this fear is trying to tell me something important, that is the beginning of power. The very fact that you're willing to examine your fear means you've already taken the first step most people never take, and that's not weakness, that's wisdom. But before you can transform your relationship with fear, you have to face something difficult, something most people avoid their entire lives. You have to see fear not as an obstacle, but as a messenger bringing you critical information about what matters to you, information about where you're ready to grow, information about what you value deeply enough to feel protective of, information about the edges of your comfort zone, information about your next level, a messenger that appears not to stop you, but to prepare you. Understanding this doesn't make fear comfortable, but it makes it meaningful. And when you understand that fear is information, not instruction, you stop feeling powerless and start feeling curious. Curiosity is the first form of courage. Curiosity is how you begin transforming your relationship with fear. Curiosity is how you stop treating every uncomfortable feeling as a threat. And once you begin that process, something shifts. A quiet strength begins to form. Not the strength that comes from never feeling afraid, but a new kind of strength. A strength rooted in feeling afraid and moving forward anyway. A strength built on awareness. A strength that grows not from eliminating fear, but from understanding what your fear is protecting. Because here's where the story quietly shifts. Because once you begin to see fear as information rather than instruction, something inside you expands. Not in a way that makes you reckless, but in a way that makes you finally honest with what you're capable of. You start realizing that the version of yourself you've been protecting wasn't the full version. It was the version shaped by avoidance, by safety seeking, by staying small enough to never trigger fear. Maybe you never learned how to sit with discomfort. Maybe you didn't know that feelings pass. Maybe you never received modeling for how to be afraid and functional at the same time. Maybe you never saw courage demonstrated, so you avoided situations that required it. Maybe you mistook comfort for safety. Maybe you confused familiarity with rightness. Maybe you believed staying still meant staying safe, and these pieces of your past became pieces of your present. But here's the turning point. Once you understand that fear is not the enemy, you gain the power to use it as fuel. You start noticing moments where you can choose differently. You start catching yourself before you automatically retreat. You begin recognizing that your fear is showing you exactly what you need to move toward. And that realization is the beginning of transformation. Because growing into your power isn't just about achieving goals or becoming successful. Growing into your power is the slow, sometimes uncomfortable process of expanding your capacity to feel without running away. It's learning to ask yourself, what is this fear protecting me from? It's discovering that courage doesn't come from being fearless. It comes from being afraid and choosing purpose over comfort. And maybe that's where you've been stuck for years. Not because you lack ability, but because you've never questioned the rule that fear means stop. Rules like, if it feels scary, it's wrong. If you're uncertain, wait. If you're uncomfortable, retreat. If you're anxious, avoid. If you're nervous, postpone. If you doubt yourself, don't try. If you might fail, don't start. If you might be rejected, don't reach out. If you might look foolish, stay hidden. If you might feel vulnerable, build walls. But look at what those rules cost you. They kept you safe, but they also kept you small. They protected you from failure, but they also protected you from growth. They saved you from embarrassment, but they also saved you from authenticity. They shielded you from pain, but they also shielded you from aliveness. You managed your fear, but managing isn't the same as living, and this is the part that requires courage. Using fear as a compass will feel wrong at first, not because you're making a mistake, but because your nervous system has been trained to see fear as a stop sign instead of a green light pointing toward your growth. But you're not that person anymore who has to let fear decide everything. And the threats your mind warns you about are often exaggerated, outdated, or entirely imagined. Yet a part of you still lives as if they're real. That's why you avoid difficult conversations even when you know they're necessary. That's why you shrink in moments that call for your full presence. That's why you second-guess decisions you know are right for you. That's why you stay in situations that no longer serve you. That's why you talk yourself out of opportunities. That's why you wait for certainty that will never come. That's why you seek permission you don't need. That's why you apologize for taking up space. That's why you dim your light to make others comfortable. That's why you exhaust yourself trying to avoid ever feeling afraid. These are not random patterns. They are fear-based survival mechanisms. But there comes a moment, quiet, often unexpected, when you realize the life you're living isn't the life you could be living. It's the life fear has negotiated for you. And living inside fear's boundaries is the most limiting thing in the world. So let me ask you something gently but directly. When was the last time you asked yourself who you would be if fear was your ally instead of your enemy? Not the absence of fear, not a life without challenges, not a version of yourself that never feels doubt, but you, with all your fears, choosing to use them as information instead of limitation. Who would you be if you weren't afraid of being afraid? Who would you be if you saw fear as a sign you're onto something important? Who would you be if you moved toward discomfort instead of away from it? Who would you be if you trusted yourself to handle whatever fear is trying to protect you from? Maybe this is the moment you realize that your hesitation isn't lack of ability, it's lack of trust. Trust that you've been waiting for the world to give you without realizing you can cultivate it yourself. Because here's the truth no one told you. You can transform fear from a prison into a compass. You can evolve beyond seeing fear as your limit. You can become someone who feels afraid and moves anyway. You can learn to recognize fear as the announcement that growth is near. You can break the pattern of letting fear shrink your life. You can build an inner world where fear is data, not destiny. And none of that is reckless. It's reclamation. It's expansion. It's choosing growth where fear chose safety. You're not ignoring fear by using it as fuel. You're finally respecting it enough to listen to what it's actually saying. And maybe on some deep, unspoken level, that's what you've wanted all along. But this transformation won't come from one decision. It won't come from suddenly becoming fearless. It won't come from pretending you're not afraid. Real change is slower, quieter. It comes from small choices repeated consistently. It comes from choosing to act even when fear is present. It happens the moment you speak the truth despite trembling. The moment you take the first step while your heart races. The moment you show vulnerability even though it terrifies you. The moment you set a boundary despite fearing conflict. The moment you pursue the dream even though failure is possible. The moment you choose honesty over safety. The moment you let yourself be seen. The moment you stop performing and start living. The moment you forgive yourself for all the times fear won, and you choose differently now. These moments accumulate slowly, steadily, quietly, and over time they build a new relationship with fear. One that replaces fear as enemy with fear as information. One that replaces avoidance with courage. One that replaces limitation with possibility. And gradually, you become someone new. Not fearless, but fear-informed. Not without doubt, but willing to doubt and move forward anyway. Not invulnerable, but willing to be vulnerable. Not certain, but willing to act without certainty. Not comfortable, but willing to grow through discomfort. The you who stops waiting for fear to disappear. The you who realizes courage is built one scared choice at a time. The you who understands that everything meaningful lives on the other side of fear. The you who knows that fear is a sign you're expanding, not failing. The you who uses fear as a compass pointing toward growth. The you who breaks free from fear's limitations. The you who lives fully instead of safely. And maybe that version of you feels distant. Maybe it feels impossible. Maybe you don't know where to begin. But every transformation begins with one simple realization. You are not broken because you feel fear. You are human. And fear is not your weakness. Fear is your body's way of saying something important is happening. Your only choice is whether you let that fear trap you or guide you. Because now you have something most people never develop: a new perspective. Perspective is the first doorway to power, and once you walk through it, something remarkable happens. You realize you're not becoming weaker by feeling fear. You're becoming stronger by learning from it. Because real strength isn't the absence of fear. Real strength is acknowledging your fear without letting it make your decisions. Real strength is feeling afraid and asking, "What is this trying to tell me?" Real strength is choosing growth even when every cell in your body wants to retreat. Because that uncomfortable feeling, that's how you know you're becoming someone bigger than your fears. And maybe one day when you look back, you'll realize something powerful. The very thing you once called weakness was actually the catalyst for your transformation. It was the signal that you were ready for more. More courage, more growth, more life. And freedom is what this entire journey has been leading you toward. Freedom from fear's control. You are allowed to build your own relationship with fear. One rooted in trust, curiosity, courage, honesty, and self-respect. And the most powerful part, you don't have to wait for permission. You can begin right here, right now, with nothing more than a quiet decision to use fear as information instead of instruction. Your story continues with you, not with the fears you've avoided, not with the safety you've clung to, not with the limits fear has imposed, but with the courage you are discovering within yourself. And as you move forward, you might begin to see something unexpected, something almost revolutionary. Fear never made you weak. It only showed you where your next strength was waiting. What you called fear was actually your power asking permission to emerge. And that power, your power, is only beginning to unfold.